Assalamu alaikum. Tahir Majid Saab, can you confirm you can hear me fine? Yasin Fahad Saab, can you confirm you can hear me fine? Please unmute your mic if you're able to.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I still get lost with the name.
It's okay. I know Yasin is a male's name in Pakistan, so no big deal.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Shehzad is with us. I just needed to make few quick announcements at the beginning. I will make these announcements at the end as well, so people who join afterwards get to know this, and I'll probably include these in the email as well. As you know, the time is changing this Sunday in US. We will keep the class time the same, inshallah. So if you're not in our time zone, I think Canada changes the same way on Sunday. Dr. Shehzad Saab has graciously agreed to adjust his time to make sure that it stays convenient to us. So we'll keep the time same. Second thing is just I would like to encourage everyone. We don't stop you from typing your question up, and I'm more than happy to read it out. However, we encourage you to ask your question on a mic. There is two reasons for that. For one, sometimes I may not be able to ask the question the way you want it to ask by reading the typed up question. And second, I typically leave the mic open for you if you open it, if you ask a question over the mic. So if you have a follow-up, then you can ask Dr. Saab that follow-up right away. And in case of a written question, I have to move on, so your follow-up is missed. Anyway, we encourage you to ask it on the mic, but if you are comfortable typing it up, I'm more than happy to read it out for you. Dr. Saab, we're all ready. You can start when you're ready. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So we begin our fourth session, the fourth session of our study circle. And as has been become conventional, we start off with this discussion on basic human value, and then we move on to some misconceptions that generally go under the label of Islam. So you might be remembering that in the last session, we had discussed charity and charitable behavior and how we can become people who are beneficial, not only to our own selves, of course, we should be reaping the benefits of the mercy of the Almighty, but at the same time, our own benefits should reach out as far as possible to people around us. So, on a similar note, today we shall discuss the basic human value, another basic human value, and that I call, and that all of us, of course, are unanimous in calling selflessness. So, selflessness is something which you can clearly see is at the pinnacle of all human values, as the word itself shows that it is the opposite of selfishness. It is something in which we prefer other people over our own selves. And you might be remembering that we have talked about last time regarding a very, very exceptional quality of a believer, as has been laid out in the Quran in Surah Hashr. The words are "Yusiruna ala anfusihim walau kana bihim khasasa." And the Quran, while praising believers, says that the outstanding believers and outstanding Muslims are those who give preference to other people, to the needs of other people, in spite of the fact that they themselves are in need. So the pinnacle of all such values, as you might agree, is this selflessness. It lies at the top of all basic human values, which are common to all of us. And this is something that we see all around us. I think that it does not need any explanation that whenever we uh, wake up in a family, whenever we constitute a family, whenever we come together to live in a family, the biggest and the strongest manifestation of selflessness is the role of our mothers. The way they bring us up, the way they sacrifice their own needs for our needs, the way that they never expect anything from us in return, the way they might even not bother that if we are, for example, impertinent to them, rude to them, but against all odds, in spite of this rude behavior, in spite of our bad demeanor, mother is one relationship in which she'll do anything, simply anything, in capital words, for the benefit, for the upbringing of our children. So I think this is something that we do not need to learn. We just need to seek and be more sensitive about by just looking at the role of the mother. Selflessness is found quite naturally amongst us. It's a human value which is found in each and every human being, and that is why it's called a human value. Regardless of our faith, we can be Christians, we can be Muslims, we could be Hindus, we could be Jews, we could be Zoroastrians, we could follow any faith, but still we can end up as being selfless people, as people who think about others, as people who are not selfish. So, as I said, the only thing here is that we need to sharpen our sensitivity towards selflessness. And the best way, I think, to do that is that we should look at the role of our mothers and we should observe them more minutely. Of course, we do observe our mothers. All of us are affected by their affection and by the way they treat us. But let us be more careful in observing how a mother goes about nurturing her child, and giving up her own comfort, her own finances, her own needs. Everything that she has is for her children. And the best part is that she does not expect anything in return. Although not doing something in return is simply disobedience and defiance and a very bad behavior. But believe me, I think you all agree that if mothers do something that they ought to do, they they'll do that. They'll continue to do that even if they face adverse behavior, even if they are treated badly. So I think in one way we are blessed, all of us who have mothers, and I think that all those people who have mothers living around them should also be very, very careful that people who have lost their mothers around them, they have lost this opportunity. They've lost this chance to learn selflessness because a very, very effective means in their surroundings have been taken away from them. And soon it will be taken away from us as well, all those whose mothers are living. So before we lose our mothers, let us be more attentive, let us be more careful in observing how a mother sacrifices everything that she has for the needs of her children. So this is how we go about discussing this value. That our primary objective is that we are able to sharpen and sensitize ourselves towards selflessness by visually observing this magnanimous, this magnificent feat around us. And as I said, the best way is our mothers. The second thing I would like to draw your attention to is that let us also look at Mother Nature. So we had mothers in the first place, and now we have Mother Nature. Mother Nature, of course, is something that we all observe ever since we are brought into this world and we continue to grow up. Thus, we see the sun rising and setting, not for itself, but for us.
Dr.
We
Saf,
see the moon.
uh, I'm very sorry to interrupt.
Is it
However,
now okay?
we're having the audio issues again. Your sound
You,
is
can
up
you
and
hear me now?
down. Can you?
I have tried to just
I think it's better now,
stop.
but
Okay. Okay.
I'll
So
let you know if it goes down again.
okay. So the second thing I was trying to draw your attention to vis-a-vis sensitizing ourselves, sharpening ourselves towards selflessness is to observe Mother Nature around us. The sun, the moon, the stars, the air, the breeze, mountains, everything around us, all of them give us a lesson. None of them is living for its own self. The sun does not shine because it needs this shining. The moon does not shimmer because it needs its light. The winds do not blow because they need this soothing effect of a breeze. The water in the fountains does not flow or come out of the earth because of its own need. If you observe, every phenomena of Mother Nature is put into the service of others. So all phenomena of Mother Nature, every one of them, is actually serving the needs of others. The sun shines for us. The moon shimmers for us. Everything around us, the stars give us guidance. They give us light at night and give us this beautiful view at night as well. So you can clearly see that the second most powerful thing around us, which teaches us selflessness, is Mother Nature itself. It is this it's just such so rampant a phenomena that often we are not even able to realize that it is happening around us. We take this to be something of a granted thing. So let us be more meticulous, let us be more careful in this manner, because the best way, as I said, is to drench ourselves with this phenomena, with this happening which goes around us. And as I said, after our own mothers, the second best thing is Mother Nature, to view Mother Nature, to go for a nature walk. When we were in school, we would be taken for a nature walk precisely for this reason. We made to walk on the lawns and in the gardens and in the orchards of our school, so that we are able to observe what the Almighty has made for us human beings, and it has put everything into service for our benefit. And it gives us this lesson that since we are reaping the benefits of others, our own attitude should be likewise. We should be people who should provide benefit to others. We should be people who live for others, who die for others, who provide comfort, ease for others. So this is the second most powerful and potent way in which we can sharpen our sensitivity towards selflessness. Another important, or another very useful, I would say, factor which can sharpen and stimulate this value of selflessness in us is if we take out time every day, if we take out time every day, or not every day, whenever we have the opportunity to actually pick out things in our house which are lying useless. They might be useless for us, but they can be of tremendous use for others. Every odd thing, for example, of some stationery items, clothes, shoes, handbags, cosmetic items, crockery, plates, lamps, you just name it, medicines, anything. There's so many things which are present in our houses, which actually we seldom need. And we might be having them in such abundance that, or in such numbers that at times we are not even aware of them. And what happens is that we end up buying a new item without realizing that we already had that thing with us. That's simply because we do not clean our drawers, we do not clean our cupboards regularly. I think that if we clean our drawers, if we clean our cupboards, if we regularly see what we have as belongings, we'll come to know that there are things lying in duplicate, in triplicate with us. And at times, the single item that we own might be of no use to us. So many clothes that we wear, there's so many things that we have that can easily make the day of someone else. So this is a very, very small prescription, I would say. We don't have to part with expensive items. We don't have to part with things that we which are dear to us. Of course, what we can do as a very starting point is to part with things that we actually are little, or which are a little of no use to us. So, and again, you see, this needs constant cleaning of our belongings, constant surveillance of our belongings. So, I always advise people who are interested in this that they should periodically, preferably on a holiday, for example, every Sunday or every alternate Sunday, whatever, they should try their best that they are able to uh, find things which lie with them and which, of course, are able to be of benefit to others. Uh, the fourth thing, my dear viewers, I'd like to point out here is that we also need to do some voluntary work. So you see, if we are people who have some sensitivity towards others, it can best be shown by perhaps joining and by perhaps doing some work which actually is for others, which is actually set out for the benefit of others. For we have a lot of organizations who do community work, community service, all sorts of work, not only for human beings, but for animals as well, for plants as well, for all types of hardships. They cater for them. They cater for old age. They cater for sick people. They cater for all kinds of people who are in distress. So, another way to create this selflessness phenomena in us, it's already there, as I said, but we need to sharpen it. Is that we must try to take up a weekly voluntary activity. This will, of course, be something which really benefits us, which really takes its influence to an ultimate extent. So when we are going to a hospital or to an hospice or to an old home or to an orphanage or to any such facility where people are in bother, people are in distress, and we are able to present some of our services in these circumstances, believe me, it is something which might be just a 1 hour undertaking for us a week, but it can really make a huge difference in the lives of so many people. So I would say another very important area, a very good area, a very effective area is that we should take up this community service, community work, voluntary work, and try our best that we are able to serve our people. The fifth suggestion that I'd like to give here is that we have a selfish motive as well in being selfless. And if none of the previous motives works, then what we need to suggest ourselves is that selflessness gives us a huge benefit. It's sort of a selfish benefit. It might not be helpful to others. Whatever we do for others, of course, is going to be helpful for others. But there's one thing that is unquestionably beneficial for our own self, and that is selflessness gives us peace of mind. It makes us lose our own worries. It makes us think of others so much that we are lost as far as our own pains and pangs are concerned. We continue to think about others and lose our own grief, lose the feeling, lose the intensity of the grief that we are in. So this is more of a selfish motive, but again, as I said, uh, as long as the motive is pure, they do count. So one of the great benefits, of course, selflessness is going to help other people. But as I said, out of experience, so many people tell us that when they are selfless, and when they behave in this fashion, the biggest benefit that they draw is that they have this peace of mind. They have this huge feeling of serenity that they have done something for others. And this makes them super elated. This makes them really happy. It really makes them as if they have done something huge, even if it might be a very small accomplishment. But it gives us that sense of fulfillment, the sense of accomplishment of helping others. And as I said, the biggest the advantage of this is that we tend to lose our own worries. Each of us is clouded with worries. All of us have our own share of worries. I'm sure all of us know that bothers and worries, they all come to us in various capacities, in various forms. All of us are inflicted with these worries, but the only thing is the form changes. What could be a worry for me, someone else could have another worry for him or her. So worries keep coming us, and I think the best way to combat this worry, or one of the ways in which we can combat worry, is by being or by presenting ourselves to serve others. Still another way, my dear viewers, to procure the selflessness, to really cultivate selflessness in us, is to read real life stories about people who have been selfless and the way they work for humanity and the way they have set out of themselves to simply lose themselves in serving others. I need not give examples because examples abound. We have so many people living around us, living examples. We just need to open our eyes. We just need to be more observant in our newspapers, in our media, and we'll find people. I don't need to give an example. For example, if you, even I have to give an example, I'll present the example of Mother Teresa. All of us know the way she spent her life in India to cure leprosy, and the way she worked and the way she lived obviously is something of a huge inspiration. Madame Ruth Fowle Dr. Ruth Fau, who was a German lady who lived in Pakistan for so many years, for almost half a century. The way she led her life. We have Abdul Sattar Edi in Pakistan. The way he would wear the clothes of people who had died. He would never wear a new cloth. It is said he would take off the clothes of people who had died on streets, and he would wear their clothes and give them coffins themselves. So there are so many examples. There are numerous examples in which people live and die for others. And I personally think that we have a lot to learn from Christian missionaries. Christian missionaries, they are such people, they are such selfless people that the way they go about presenting themselves, conducting themselves all over the world in famine-stricken areas, in areas which have droughts, in areas which are far-flung and very, very difficult to access, you'll find inevitably a Christian missionary organization working there. Let me also point out this fact that the Quran, at one instance, has praised this 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 special quality of Christians, the followers of Jesus. In Surah Hadid, it says, وَجَعَلْنَا فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُ رَأْفَةً وَرَحْمَةً, which means that the Almighty says that we have placed mercy and compassion in the hearts of those who follow Jesus. So this is a huge compliment which is paid by the Quran to Christians, to the followers of Jesus, and which you people living in the North American continent would be so very familiar about in your own surroundings. The way they have kept alive this torch, they have kept alive this torch of selflessness, and it shines even more brightly in each coming day, simply because of this special compassion, this special mercy that they have. So I'll end this session here, my dear viewers, that let us be more careful in observing this trait of selflessness. Let us be more sharp and more attentive to be selfless. It's always easy to be selfish. We are always living our own lives. We are thinking about our own selves. We are thinking about our own families. We are thinking about our own future. This is something which comes to us naturally, and of course, there is nothing wrong in it. But then let us add this feature to our future thinking, to our own planning, that we shall think not only about our own selves, not only about our own families, but about people who live around us, people who are in bother, people who are in distress, people who are in pain. We will go and find out these people. And in these days of technology, it has become so easy to do so that we can simply use our smartphones to our own advantage. We can keep track of people. We can keep in touch with people through this social media phenomena, which is so rampant these days. It's so easy to look after people through these various contraptions. So I'll end this first session with this appeal, with this request, that if we are selfless, if we are people who really want to leave a mark in this world before we go away, then the only way perhaps is to live for others and to die for others. So I'd like to answer any questions that we may have regarding this particular topic before we go on to the next part of our session.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. If any of you have any questions, please either click on the little square under the hand icon in front of your name, or you can type it up. And if there is no questions, we'll move to the next segment of this today's lecture. Perhaps there aren't any questions, so you can move.
Okay. So let's move on. And before I started the next part, I'd also like to point out one thing, and that is that I have made up a small form which judges our personality and various traits of our personality. And one of these traits is, as I said, selflessness, and the opposite of selflessness is selfishness. So if we want to judge how selfless we are, or conversely, how selfish we are, anyone would like to have an idea, I can send that form. It's basically an MCQ, multiple choice questionnaire, in which you just tick on the answer that is the most suitable vis-a-vis your own personality. And at the end of those 10 or 15 MCQs, you are graded by a specific mark scheme, and then you can have a fair idea of your own personality vis-a-vis that trait. So any one of you who would like to know more about his own personality or her own personality vis-a-vis the trait that we have discussed today, and that is selflessness, he just needs to either email me or message me. Our administrators, of course, can provide you with my contact, and I'll send that form and then also send a marking scheme. So much for that. Now, let me go on to the next session of our study circle. And as is the general case, that we take up a common or a few common misconceptions vis-a-vis Islam. So the misconception that I've picked up today relates to a ritual, and this is a ritual which is at times very difficult to make people understand about its philosophy, and therefore it has generally ended up as a ritual which is not observed in the spirit that it should be observed, and that, viewers, is the ritual of animal sacrifice. So it's always difficult for people to imagine that what exactly is the purpose of animal sacrifice. For example, we observe this ritual of animal sacrifice on Eid al-Adha. We observe this ritual at times when someone is born in our family, the aqiqah, and similarly at various other instances in which we want to thank God, we slaughter an animal and distribute the meat of that animal. But then the question arises that if slaughtering an animal is meant for a sadaqah, is meant for charity, is meant for the consumption of people, then in today's age, how is it relevant? And the relevancy question arises because many people say that today, if people need something, it's more of things in kind or in cash, in currency. People are in need of a lot of things, and instead of sacrificing goats or camels or sheep, isn't it much better to donate a certain amount of money? And this question, my viewers, generally arises or gets pronounced when the Eid al-Adha approaches, because animal slaughter is done by so many people all over the world. And then the question comes to their mind that why is it that we should not spend the money that we gather for the sacrifice of an animal and give that money to some worthy cause, like, for example, education or for the help of some poor people, etc. So this is the question, this is the issue that we're going to address today. And I'd like to make this submission that we need to understand it in a little more depth so that we are able to at least gauge the view of our religion vis-a-vis animal sacrifice. So the first thing, before I try to explain the philosophy of animal sacrifice on Eid or at any other occasion, is that it needs to be understood that at the very outset, animal sacrifice is not obligatory at all on Eid. It's not obligatory, or it's not mandatory, it's not compulsory. It's an optional act of worship. It's an optional virtual ritual. So the first thing that needs to be understood is that the Almighty, except in a very certain case, and that is that when you combine Hajj and Umrah, I'm not talking about that particular case, but in general, animal sacrifice is never an obligatory act. It always was an optional act. However, it is highly desirable. However, it has a very, very special importance, which if we are able to understand and also communicate to our next generation, and we can really have a feel of why the Almighty has made this ritual, even a ritual of optional worship. So you see, in order to understand and gauge what animal sacrifice is, let me give you a few examples which shall give this perspective that I'd like you to have regarding animal sacrifice. The perspective is that there are certain symbolic things in our life which are never meant per se. They are never meant on their face value. They have some deeper significance. For example, our national flag. Now, taken as a common piece of cloth, it does not have any special significance because it's just a piece of cloth. And on that piece of cloth is drawn the map, the flag of our country. But again, when that flag of a country is raised or is used on our national gatherings, it carries a special significance. It actually symbolizes our unity. It symbolizes our country. So the flag in itself is nothing. It is actually conveying a deeper reality, and that it is the symbol of unity or the symbol of representation of a country. So you see, there are certain things in our lives which have significance not because of what they are or what they appear, but because they have a deeper link to our lives. And as I said, in the case of a flag, it's just a piece of cloth, but albeit a very, very special piece of cloth which has a very symbolic significance as a very significant sign of the country that we live in. Animal sacrifice, my dear viewers, is something very, very similar. When we sacrifice our animal or an animal, the basic purpose is that we symbolize ourselves, that we are presenting this animal before the Almighty on this occasion with the niyyah, with the intention that tomorrow, if our own life is needed, if our own life is needed to be sacrificed for a cause worthy to God, we'll never abstain. So, in recognition of this, in acknowledgement of this, we sacrifice an animal, acknowledging before God that today we are sacrificing this animal, but tomorrow, if our own life is needed, we will present it to you. So basically, animal sacrifice symbolizes our own will to sacrifice our own lives for the cause of the Almighty. The animal that we are sacrificing is basically a substitute for our own lives. It is a substitute for what we can present to God in the form of our own life. And hence you can see that when we slaughter an animal, we are actually making this commitment that God, I am aware that my own life might be needed for a cause which is dearer to you. And there's nothing more dear to me than to present my life for a cause which is worthy to you. So now, if we understand this significance, then another question which comes to mind and which I think is solved at the same time is that when people think that the purpose of animal sacrifice is to slaughter an animal and to distribute its meat, here comes that hitch, that problem, which actually makes us think that why at all should we do that? So this explanation should tell us that the purpose of animal sacrifice is not distribution of meat. That's just a byproduct. When we sacrifice an animal, we have another higher purpose in mind, as I said. We have this commitment to make to God that, God, I'm presenting my own life to you. So as far as the product is concerned, since we are obviously sacrificing an animal, then that animal's meat has to be consumed. So we can consume it for our own selves, we can give it to our friends, we can give it to people in need. That could be anything. So it must not be the case that people start thinking that we are wasting meat or we are running over meat when we are sacrificing so many animals, because we think that the purpose of animal sacrifice is distributing meat. That's not the purpose. And the Quran is clearly said, that the blood and the meat of this animal is not going to reach the Almighty. It's the taqwa, it's the inner intention which you have in your hearts at the time of sacrifice that's going to reach the Almighty. So as I said, that we need to understand that when we slaughter an animal, the issue of distribution of meat is not the purpose of animal sacrifice. It's just a byproduct. It's just this added advantage that we can make use of that meat to either give it to others or even use it for our own selves. We can keep all the meat our own selves. We can do anything with that meat. There's nothing stipulated in this regard. And the second thing that we need to understand is that animal sacrifice in itself was never made obligatory. So if we take both these statutes in mind, that it's not obligatory and it has a very special symbolic significance, animal sacrifice will be reduced to the capacity that we have for it. Instead of every person going for sacrifice, we can symbolize it in one family or even a larger family if need be, if circumstances are such. For example, we know that so many countries in the West, we are not able to sacrifice animals for our own selves because of restrictions and so many other things. It has become increasingly difficult. So, for example, if families get together and they are given this opportunity of just presenting a collective combined sacrifice, and also before they do the sacrifice, they are able to think that what they are doing is that they are collectively pledging their own selves to the Almighty for the future. I think it would be a much bigger contribution and a much more self-realization than what we are doing today. Today we are doing an animal sacrifice without realizing its purpose, and we are doing animal sacrifice without even knowing the purpose that we intend to do it, and also we have made it a status symbol. And in countries like the US or the UK or Australia or some of the other Western countries, it has become virtually impossible to sacrifice animals because of the municipal restrictions. We'll also come to know and argue with the authorities that if we are given some space to give a collective sacrifice, maybe a couple of family for one animal or whatever the proportion, we might even get that opportunity. And when we see an animal being slaughtered in front of ourselves, we should stand there as if possible, because that's something which is going to make us motivated that this animal is actually a substitute for our own life. So I'd like to underscore this point. Since another very concept, another very similar concept is linked with this animal sacrifice, I am also going to take it up in this, and I also like to point out that the point which I'm going to just now speak upon is also one of the causes for atheism, for one of the causes of atheism or leaving God or leaving religion is the one that I'm just going to speak to you now, and it also relates to animal sacrifice. And that is that why did the Almighty ask Abraham sallallahu alaihi wasallam to sacrifice his son Ishmael? Why? And as I said, people who have become atheists, if you ask them amongst many questions, some of them also say that they would not like to believe in a God who has asked his celebrated prophet to sacrifice a son who was begotten at such a ripe old age. So, as I said, that this particular directive, we'll understand it separately. But before we do so, as I said, we need to understand that it is by not understanding it at the right plane, in the right philosophical sense, we have lost many people to atheism, because to them, God is a cruel God. God is someone who is very callous, because he has asked an animal, a prophet of God, it's not just an animal for sacrifice, but a human being for sacrifice. Sacrificing an animal obviously has had its own questions, but now this is one step ahead. The Almighty has demanded at one point of time in history the sacrifice of a human life, and that too by a very famous prophet of God, and that too of his son, who was destined to become another prophet of God. So this is something of a question which has bothered many people, and let me try to answer this question in the light of the research carried out by a very famous scholar of the subcontinent, Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, who has written extensively on this subject, and by quoting ancient scriptures and the Quran has endeavored to answer this question, of course, by using the language of the Quran directly, and by adducing from the words of Surah Safat, in which this incident of sacrifice is mentioned vis-a-vis Abraham and Ishmael, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the words of the Quran, as if you can just recall Surah Safat, I'll just recite those words to you, were that when Abraham laid down Ishmael so that he could cut his throat, the words of the Almighty which were revealed at that time were "Qad saddaqta ru'ya," which means, Abraham, you have made your dream come true. It was not required. So, if we study ancient scriptures, and if we also study the phenomena, what we call dreams of the prophet, we come to realize that the dreams which are shown to the prophets of God, they are basically meant to instruct them. They symbolize facts. They symbolize a lot of things which the Almighty wants to teach us. And we all have read the dream of the prophet Joseph in Surah Yusuf, in which he saw 11 stars and the sun and the moon prostrating before himself. Of course, when he saw these, he could easily see that this was not to be taken in a literal sense. When the stars and the sun and the moon bow down in prostration, it has to have something symbolic in it. And when at the end of the story we come to know that his brothers had come to him and his parents also, when at the end he was told that this is the interpretation of his dream, that 11 stars and the sun and the moon will prostrate before him. So what I mean to say is that the dreams of the prophet of God, they are not only meant for their instruction and teaching, but more often than not, they are symbolic in nature. They are not to be taken literally. They are not to be interpreted literally, just as the prostration of the sun and the moon and the stars was not to be taken literally. They symbolized the parents of Joseph and his 11 brothers. In a very similar way, if we study ancient scriptures, and as I said, Imam Hamiduddin Farahi has actually pointed out this in his famous book, Ar-Rai as-Sahih fi Man huwa Zabih, written in Arabic and translated into Urdu by his own pupil, Amin Ahsan Islahi, and parts of it have also been translated into English by one of our early members and scholars of Al-Mawrid, Nadir Akil Ansari. He has also translated part of that book. We have that on our website, and we can get to the purport of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi if you do not understand Arabic by either reading the Urdu translation or the English translation. And that is that basically animal sacrifice symbolizes devoting our life, or human sacrifice, you can say. Whenever you find a human being sacrificed in your dream, in the dream of the prophet, as has been described in ancient scriptures, the symbolism of a dream in which someone is shown to be slaughtering someone is that that particular person is meant to dedicate his life for the Almighty. So what happened was that actually Abraham and Ishmael, as you know, were to build the house of God, the Baytullah in Mecca. And the Almighty wanted Ishmael to be the custodian of Baytullah, to be the keeper of Baytullah, to devote his life for Baytullah. And for this purpose, he showed this dream to Abraham that you are being given a son. The symbolism in that dream was that he was sacrificing, or the actual form was that he was sacrificing his son, and the symbolism was that he was being asked by the Almighty to dedicate his son for the service of the house of God. So this was the symbolism that was meant. In other words, when Abraham was being shown that he is sacrificing his son Ishmael, the symbolism in this dream was not that he was meant to sacrifice his son literally or factually, but the fact was that he was being asked to devote his son for the sustenance, for the upkeep of the house of God. And instead of going for this interpretation, this celebrated prophet of God, thinking that it is a great trial for him, he actually went after interpreting it literally. And then he was corrected by the Almighty. He said that this was never required from you. You have made the dream come true. We only wanted you to observe this dream and then think that you have been asked by God to devote and dedicate your own son for the service of the house of God. So this is what we have understood from Imam Farahi and the way he has actually made us understand this verse of the Quran, which was being interpreted in another way. And that we are being told that the symbolism of animal sacrifice actually is a symbolism, first of all, we need to understand. If Abraham was shown that he was sacrificing his son, the purpose was to tell him that he should devote his son for the service of God. The purpose was not to make him sacrifice. As I said, because whatever is shown to prophets of God in their dreams is not to be taken literally. It always symbolizes some higher reality. It always symbolizes some other reality. and that should not be taken literally. So we need to understand that the Almighty, as a result, never asked for a prophet of God to literally put a knife on the throat or to slaughter him, because this was, as I said, what the dream said, what the dream symbolized, and the dream itself stood for a symbol. So the symbol behind that was to dedicate Ishmael, which ultimately happened. We know that later on, first Abraham and then Ishmael, they became the custodians and the keepers of the house of God. So, with these two explanations regarding the purpose and philosophy of animal sacrifice, and also why the Almighty asked for the sacrifice of Ishmael, what was the reason or the symbolism behind it, I come to the end of today's session and would be very glad to answer any questions that you might be having. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shab. Before I take any questions, few announcements. I did make some of these announcements at the beginning of the class, so just repeating for those who arrived after these. As you know, tomorrow, Sunday, the time changes in the US, I think North America as well, Canada as well. We will not change the class time. It will stay the same. Dr. Saab has agreed to change his time in Pakistan, so it will still be 11 Central for everyone. The other thing I mentioned was that we encourage you to ask your questions via mic. You're free to type them up, but if you ask via mic, you have a choice to, I'll leave your mic open. You can follow up if things are not clear, and it might be easier for you. Also wanted to mention, please send us an email or write here in the class any suggestions you may have on how we can make this class better or tailor it to your needs. Your suggestions are very welcome. Suggest anything you like via email or directly here. Dr. Saab, multiple people asked me for the form that you mentioned. So if you don't mind, send it to me via email. So when I send the recording out for this class, I'll send it out to everyone instead.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Other thing is, some of you may know the Dr. Saab's class is lesson. This session is also broadcasted on Facebook simultaneously. There is equal or more number of people who attend via Facebook. I will try my best to take any questions posted there. Before I was not able to, but I'll be glad to anything typed up there to take it as well. The only other thing, Dr. Saab, I would like to suggest to you, if at all possible, before you end each class, if you can announce beforehand the topic of the next session, as well as the misconception you'll take up, it might help people prepare for what's coming. The first question I'll take was from Facebook. Dr. Saab, it's not directly related to your question. It's up your lesson today, but you can take it up or ask me to move to the next question that's come through the GoToWebinar. Gul Yusufzai asked that please comment on the verses of the Quran which say don't keep non-Muslims as your friends. They cannot be your friends until you follow their deen.
Okay, I think we have discussed this issue not here in this series of Islam study circles, but a number of times in various other sessions and talks. But just to briefly recap, when the Quran says "La tattakhidul yahuda wan nasara awliya min dunil mu'minin," or "La yattakhidul mu'minul kafirina awliya min dunil mu'minin," which means that do not befriend the Jews and the Christians, then we need to understand that the Jews and the Christians which are mentioned in the Quran are entirely different from the Jews and the Christians that we encounter today in our own lives. The people living around us, they are a different category of Jews and Christians. And I say this because the Quran itself has specified that the Jews and Christians of the times of the Prophet, they became kafirs or disbelievers by intentionally denying the Prophet or the truth which was right before them. They were absolutely convinced of the truthfulness of the veracity of the Prophet. But in spite of being convinced, they had denied, and therefore invited the wrath of the Almighty by telling the Muslims that they should not befriend such people who know what the truth is and they still go against it. So the prophets of God in their own lifetimes, they deliver the truth, and the people who are the Rasul among them, the messengers, they actually give make this communication in such a conclusive way that there is absolutely no excuse for other people to deny it. And this in the terms of the Quran is called itmamul hujjah, which means completion of the argument. And that in fact means that the argument is presented in such a way, in such a conclusive way, in such a complete way that no one can deny it. So the Christians and the Jews of the Prophet's times were those Christians and Jews who accepted the Prophet. They knew he was a prophet of God, and in spite of that, they rejected him. Today's Christians and today's Jews are not necessarily among these people. We cannot pinpoint who amongst these Christians or Jews are ones who are deliberately denying, or whether they are denying in some confusion, or denying because of some question that they might be having, or maybe even denying because the news has not properly reached them. So we have find all these categories of Muslims, of non-Muslims, or Jews and Christians, or other denominations around us. So therefore, we need to understand that we must interpret a verse of the Quran in the context it has been revealed. The context of making Jews and Christians not as your friends, as I said, is that these Jews and these Christians who have denied this prophet that we have sent among them, in spite of being fully convinced in their hearts that he is a true prophet of God, do not make such evil people your friends. So this is my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I have a question from Yasin Fahad. Please go ahead and unmute your mic.
I have actually a couple of questions. My first question is, when we sacrifice an animal for sadaqah, normally, it's if somebody is sick or very ill, we say, okay, let's sacrifice an animal and do sadaqah to get over that difficulty. So how does in that case it relates to the spirit of the sacrifice as you described it, that it's to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are willing to sacrifice our lives for his sake? That's my first question. The second one is, you suggested that if there is a problem with slaughtering the animals, family can do one for the whole family, or few families can do one. However, I want to know, if there is no problem and if you do have an opportunity to sacrifice, is it preferable that we do it individually if we can, or is it still okay to just do one for a family? So if you can please answer that. Okay. Thank you.
So as far as
as far as the first question is concerned, hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. The first question is that as far as giving animal sacrifice as charity is concerned, that the aspect of giving your own self still remains there, but the element of gratitude, the element of helping others, as I said, is a byproduct. It's always a byproduct. Whenever you are sacrificing an animal for the benefit of other people, for example, distributing the meat for to the poor people, that the element of your own life as a symbolism is still there. But here you have the purpose of actually distributing the meat of that animal to other people, as the case would be. And as I said, that we also need to understand that animal sacrifice is not the only way in which the sadaqah can be made. For example, today it can be made in cash and can be made in kind, in currency, and so many other ways. But if we have to distribute meat, if that is what we want, of course we can do it. But the philosophy will still remain the same, that we are presenting our own life as substitute. And the only thing is that that particular meat that we are getting out of that animal is meant for distribution. The philosophy will never change. As I said, that once a ritual has that basic underlying philosophy, it always remains the same. The only thing is that the purpose for which that is used may change with the objective that we have in mind. And as far as the second question that you asked is concerned, as I said, that animal sacrifice in itself is an optional thing. It's a totally optional thing. Even if you have the opportunity, even if every person has the opportunity to sacrifice an animal separately, even then it's up to him or her. So you see, first of all, what we need to tell people is that it's a matter of your own choice. It's purely up to you whether you want to sacrifice an animal or not. And if you don't do it, you will not be sinning. You will not be going against the directive of God. It's not something of a mandatory nature. It's totally optional nature. But as I said, very desirable because it has a very deep symbolic significance.
One more thing, if you can clarify, you mentioned that there is no requirement to distribute meat in any specific way.
Right.
Just wanted to know, because since a child, I've always heard my mother saying and elders of the family saying that it has to be 3 portions, one for ourselves, one for family relatives, and one for the poor. So is this just something that
This is
cultural,
just
or is it?
This is something which has just become famous. The Prophet never ever said made this distribution. This is something that people, I think it's a very, very good formula. But as far as the nature of this formula is concerned, it is not a Sharia or law or something which the Prophet said. It's what people devise for their own selves, and gradually it became famous. It's entirely up to us. We can use all the meat for ourselves. We can distribute all the meat to our friends. We can distribute it to all the poor. It's entirely our own prerogative.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Sab, can I follow up on something? You said the animal sacrifice is optional. Are you making a distinction between the animal sacrifice made at the time of Hajj and, for example, living in Pakistan, doing it at the house or on Eid?
So, as I said, I'm talking about the animal sacrifice which is made on Eid. As far as the sacrifice which is done on Hajj, that as I said is an exception. That's an obligatory sacrifice, and that sacrifice is done because when people combine Umrah and Hajj in one journey, then this sacrifice has to be done as an atonement, as a kafara, because the Almighty wanted that we should undertake separate journeys for Hajj and for Umrah. But because of our own limitations, we undertook a single journey and observed or offered Umrah and Hajj in the same journey. So the sacrifice that we do at that time, for people who actually do Umrah and Hajj when they go for Hajj, for them it's mandatory. And as I said, it's basically a penalty. It's basically an atonement that what you were required to do in 2 separate journeys, you have ended up doing in one journey, and therefore, as a penalty, you sacrifice an animal.
Dr. Sab, the widespread practice of sacrificing an animal in Muslim countries on Eid, in people's own countries, did that start as to show solidarity or to show oneness with the people who are actually performing Hajj and performing sacrifice there?
No, actually, it's basically the Sunnah of Abraham or the Sunnah Ibrahimi, which was done. In commemoration of that, we slaughter an animal on Eid al-Azha, and it started off as something that we do to commemorate the sacrifice of Abraham, and therefore it was something which ended up by the Hanafites or the Hanafi jurists. They thought that it is a wajib, and they have their own definition of this. And I'm not going to go into details, but basically, people of the subcontinent, India and Pakistan and some other countries, since they follow the Hanafite fiqh, and according to the Hanafite fiqh, every person who is an earning member, he is liable to make an animal sacrifice. So this is how it ended up in the Indo-Pak, in which every person of who has a certain amount of affluence, which is called nisab, he is required to undertake that sacrifice. So that is a Hanafi interpretation. But as I said, the question that you've asked basically is that it's not a solidarity question. It's basically to commemorate the sacrifice of Abraham, which he did at the behest of the Almighty. So it's basically the Sunnat Ibrahimi that we are undertaking. But again, that Sunnat Ibrahimi is not mandatory.
So in our countries, in India, Pakistan, it's more in keeping with the Hanafi opinion.
Right.
Thank you. I have a question from Manazza Malik. It is not on topic, but again, it's up to you. She says, please explain how to determine how much zakat to give.
Well, this is a detailed topic, and I would suggest that, inshallah, one of these sessions we'll take up some of the misconceptions which surround the concept of zakat, and we'll discuss this topic in detail, because answering it in a very short way will not encompass the comprehensive nature in which this topic should be dealt with. So I would request that if you could hold this question, because this question is in fact a whole topic that needs to be discussed in one of these sessions.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Our time is up. Any last things you have to say, and you can close the class as you like.
Well, just as I said, that I'd like to request all our participants that do give us this feedback. If they think that these sessions are they need to be changed or added something, it will be benefit for us, because as I've always said this, that we are basically staring in the dark, because we are not able to see your faces, we are not able to read your faces, and not know what exactly is the delivery and how we are trying to put across things. So it always helps if you give us feedback, and always I would say that keep this feature, this aspect of personality development before you, of becoming better individuals, better human beings, because that is the first question that we're going to be answerable for when we appear before the Almighty.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Saab. Inshallah, we'll meet next Saturday.
Okay. Thank you very much. Wa alaikum assalam.